I'm the CEO of Startup Tucson. Innovation Economics, this is a session in the series, so very excited about that. And basically the series is focused on sharing why entrepreneurship is so critical for economic development, and what we as a community can do to set our startups up for success. Each month we invite a national thought leader to join us and share what they're working on, and kind of what they do to support entrepreneurs and local economies. And so we're super excited that our guest is here today to share some of her work. And the goal really is to, like I said, explore these ideas and use them as inspirations for policies and programs that we can bring to Tucson. This series is run by Startup Tucson. If you're not familiar with Startup Tucson, we are an economic development nonprofit that's working to support entrepreneurs and startups here in Tucson, Arizona. We serve approximately 3,000 entrepreneurs a year through educational programming, mentorship, and networking and other opportunities like this. So I will turn it over to Dre, who will introduce our speaker this month.
This issue of women in technology has really been pressing for Startup Tucson's team. A big study came out in Arizona that Arizona is underdeveloping the fastest growing population of entrepreneurs in the country, which is women. An economic development study was shown that we are losing about $100 billion a year and about 90,000 jobs because of the gender gap within women in entrepreneurship and technology. And a big national, that we see this as this is playing out all over the country. So we were already excited about talking about women in technology. This year we had a Women in Tech Fellowship to really start thinking about issues like this. I have come across Marie. She just speaks at all the big conferences on women in tech. She's always a headliner, so I've been familiar with her work. So we were super excited to have her here. And then after we had already set the date, a big study came out of, I think over 40,000 women participated in it. And they found that 1 in 4 women are actually considering leaving or scaling back the workforce right now because of COVID-related issues. And this is just really, really huge. This has been said to, it could potentially put women back a decade, because it's especially impacting women in leadership and senior positions who are stepping down. This is especially impacting women of color in these high-level positions. So we just felt like we needed to, make sure that we also address this really, really pressing moment. So we're going to be talking about women in technology. We're also going to be talking about women in business and how we're seeing COVID impacting women across the country. So this month I already mentioned a little bit, so we're featuring a co-CEO of Equalithons, Hack-a-thons for Equality, Marie Roker-Jones. Her company is Essteem, and they've been really taking a very innovative approach to closing the gap with women in the technology fields and in business. So I'm going to let her talk a little bit about how she's been sort of revolutionizing that, and they've been seeing great success with increased productivity, investor ROI, as a result of the work that they've been doing. So a little bit more. Equalithons are a unique community impact-driven approach to D&I. They are future hiring events. Equalithons guarantee that you're going to get the best diverse talent resumes and create a sustainable culture of inclusion and belonging. Through diversity and inclusion, your company can achieve incredible results, and the impact of them is super significant and documented. Marie Roker-Jones is a nationally recognized thought leader on the topic of inclusion, particularly in high-tech spaces. And we are very delighted to welcome her. So thank you, Marie, and I will hand it over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great start to your day. I'm in New York, so my day is already almost, I shouldn't say almost done, but we're in the afternoon part. I'm excited to be here and especially talk about women in tech, just diversity in tech in general, because that's really something that's near and dear to my heart. And if my Zoom background is, if you can see, there's like a guy looking over like what she's doing, what is she doing here? So it's kind of like what the conversation that I want to have about why we need to really be part of this tech movement. And even though this study kind of makes us feel like, okay, where do we go from here? I feel like this is an opportunity for us to move forward. It's also an opportunity for us to really start using the skills that are that women have, which is, and Dre, we talked about it a little bit about how there was an article about how women in tech like to create solutions, and that we're all about fixing things, and not fixing or making things better. So we like to use tech for real world solutions, which is important, which is what I'm going to go into a little bit about our hackathons, and then go into what we can do to move forward, and what we can do to start really embracing diversity in tech, particularly for women, for people of color, but just diversity overall, and how we can create more inclusive workplaces for belonging. Essteem, our Equalithons we call it Hacking for Equality, are really about how do we help women and people of color showcase their skills without the drudgery of an interview and a test. One of the things that women in tech have told me is that when they have to interview, or when they have to do this test to show their skills, their imposter syndrome really shows up. And I think that's something many of us can relate to, that no matter how talented we are and how much experience we have, somehow we start to question our abilities, especially when it comes time to show it. So we feel that hackathons are a great way for employers to get a real feel and a real world interview, we say, of what somebody can contribute to their company. So for example, credentials, there's a lot of talk about credentials. Should somebody have a computer science degree, or if they come from a boot camp? If someone's in a hackathon and they're doing their part, you're not going to know if they have a computer science degree or they came from a boot camp. You're going to see the amount of attention they put to being part of this project. You're going to see their leadership skills show up. You're going to see what they've contributed to a team. So we feel that that's the best way for reducing the bias that comes up, especially for women when they're interviewing for jobs. That when employers can see how you work in a team setting, especially when they bring their employees along, and how you work with their employees, they now have an idea if this person would really contribute to our team, whether it's front end, back end, whatever tech skills that they're bringing to the company. So every hackathon has like a social impact mission. And this month is the future of women at work, which coincides perfectly with this report, because we're talking about how do we bring women who have technical and non-technical skills together to create these solutions for what's happening based on this report. So one of the things that the report really that comes out really for the report is that gender parity. So women, whether in their personal or professional lives, they tend to take on the bulk of responsibilities. So, and because there's this pressure of wanting to show that we're part of the team and we can hold our own, a lot of times we'll go the extra mile to do something just to show that, okay, I'm not the slacker, I'm not going to bring this team down, I have what it takes to be part of it. But what it does is it leaves us off balance in our own lives. So what the report brings up is the fact that there needs to be some norms around flexibility for women. And we had a guest today earlier on our workshop, and she talked about women being allies for other women. It's important that when we show up in numbers and when another woman supports you, that now you can really talk about, yeah, we need to create more flexibility, because with the pandemic, there's a lot more that we're doing at home and at work. And there's got to be something that gives us the opportunity to really create less stress in our lives. The other thing is around performance reviews. And one of the things I want to bring up when it comes to diversity and performance reviews is we have to also take into account how a performance review is presented and how someone receives it. So cultural competency is so important, because a lot of times women are sitting there in a performance review thinking, I did the best. This should be no problem. And then when they get back something that is not very positive, they're questioning now their abilities, and now that imposter syndrome comes up. But we also have to take into account that just because somebody perceives something to be doesn't mean that it's true. And so if a woman is taking time off because she's a mom and she has days that her child is sick, that doesn't mean that that person's not a team player. It's just the truth of the reality of what her life is, and she's trying to balance that. So that shouldn't show up in a performance review. And the other stuff is like gender bias and policies. So for our hackathon, we want to address that. One of the things we're having is someone to speak about the intersection of politics, policies, and tech, which is very important, because no matter how many solutions we create, if there's not policies in place, if there's not more women that are in office locally and nationally, things are not going to move forward. So we need everyone to we need women to be in different spaces for this to work. And we need to empower not just ourselves, but we need to just inspire other women to really take lead in these different spaces, such as in policies, in politics, and in tech, really, so that they can start to take the lead in that. Another speaker is speaking about working mothers, which again goes back to gender parity. Working mothers are having a very difficult time right now, because if you have virtual learning and you're trying to manage your workload, that's hard, especially even if you have one child. If you have more than one child, it's even more difficult. So what are we doing for working mothers? And the last is from our Girl Develop It, which is one of our nonprofit partners. And they're looking at how do we create more sustainable solutions so that women in tech can continue to upskill, because that's also important. How do we make sure that you still continue to have these skills and you can continue working without having to pay for them? Because that's another part. Like, if we're paying for our continuing education, if we're paying for different things, that's going to put even more pressure on ourselves. And so how do we make sure that women have all those resources and tools and that support that they need in order to really make these powerful changes? So what I'm saying is, it takes all of us, that whether you are an entrepreneur, a coder, in a non-tech role, in business development, marketing, no matter what you are, it takes all of us coming together as women and as allies to say, what needs to be done? What do we need to do? And how can I be part of that? Because without action, it's just words. And right now, this report is just showing us that, okay, things look bleak, but it's also showing us that this is our chance to really step up and do better and be better. So my question to all of you is, what can each of you do in support of women in tech? What's the action you can take within your company? What's the action you can take locally, nationally? What can you do to start making this progress? Because if we're saying that this is going to set women back a decade, what does that mean for the next generation? And what does that mean for girls who now are looking at us and, thinking, I want to get into STEM, but now I'm hearing that women are leaving and now there's no leadership. Where does that leave us? So we really want to set that example, and not just for girls, but I'm going to say for boys too, because if our sons and nephews, or the boys in our lives, don't see women in leadership roles, then what's that message that's given to them? What's that saying to them about what women as leaders, what can they contribute to the world? So we really want to make sure that each one of us is doing our part, because it's not up to anyone else and no one's going to do it for us. So we have to start saying, all right, what can I do? And let's stop thinking that it has to be something on a grand, it doesn't have to be grand. It could be something small. And then you start to maybe mobilize other people to start doing that. So, those of you who are in Tucson, what can you start doing now? And maybe it's just for Tucson, and maybe it's just for women in tech, but what are the ways you can do it? We're at least at a time where technology is accessible to us. So what can we use in tech? What can we create to make lives better? What can we do for working mothers? Childcare should not be the reason that a woman can't go to work or it's affecting her ability to work. And it's one of the biggest challenges. But what can we start to do? And also, how can we start to educate our allies about what's really happening? I think a lot of times we take on so much as women and we want to show I can do this, I got this, and we're independent. And yes, that's great. But at the same time, when people start to think, or our allies start to think you're so independent, then we forget to ask for help. And this is the time right now, I think, with this report to say, you know what, we do need help. So what are you going to contribute? What are you going to do? So if somebody says, I think one of the things I always say to employers who tell me, oh, sourcing, can't find women, can't find people of color. I'm like, well, they show up for our hackathons. So what are you doing? What are you doing to source? What are you doing that you're stepping out of your comfort zone? So if you tell me that your LinkedIn is comprised of people you went to school with, people who are in your circle, then of course you're not going to source. So we have to start stepping out of that comfort and start saying, what can I do from the space that I'm in right now to make a difference? And not just for myself as a woman, not just for the women in my life, but for the girls, for the boys, for the next generation, for the programs that are going to suffer, because if we don't have women in these leadership roles, what does that mean for nonprofit organizations? What does that mean for programs that depend on women leadership? And what does that mean for all the things that women contribute to? So, again, I know it's difficult, and that 1 in 4 can feel like it's daunting and like, really, what's next? But I think it's also, it's a pivotal moment for us to really think about where we are and where we're going next. And, I think I could go on and on because I feel so, I guess I feel so passionate about this because I'm a woman and I'm a Black woman, and I know that these things are going to affect us overall, and it's going to affect the most vulnerable in our society. So it's the women that are working hard and that don't have access to a network, don't have access to the people to really empower themselves. They're the ones that are going to really suffer. So we have to, those of us who have the opportunity or who have some kind of privilege, we need to start to look at how can we use that to help others, and how can we make this change, and then how can we start focusing on what's valuable to women overall.
I wanted to start off with a little bit more details about the hackathons. How did you come up with this idea? How does it work? If you're a big company and you're like, ooh, I'm curious, how do you do these? Like, can you talk us a little bit more through, like, what does that look like? And what have been some of the results you've seen from it?
Sure. So if it's a company, we say, sponsor a hackathon and bring your employees, because it's also great for employee engagement, especially now with so many people working remotely. It's a great way for your employees to now work on something that is impactful, and now they feel like they're giving back. So for an employer, it's really, we call it a partnership, because you're bringing your employees, you're coming into this, and you're thinking of solutions. So we come up with the challenges based on the theme. So for the future of women at work, the challenges are how can we address gender parity? What can we do to start helping women balance that inequality? What can we do about making the pay more equal, but at the same time, making it more transparent? What are the tools that we need so that we know what our male counterparts are being paid versus what we're being paid? And again, for working mothers, what can we do so that employers can start to change their policies around working mothers and help working mothers create more of a balance in their lives and create more the ability to be leaders? Because it shouldn't be, and or. It should just, it should be and, not or. So it shouldn't be like, oh, I'm a mom or a leader. No, you can be both, but it's not possible if you don't have policies in place that support that. So.
And I just realized some folks on this call might not be aware of what a hackathon is. Can you just?
Sure. So, you know what? Good question. So a hackathon is where usually a hackathon is like 48 hours, particularly when it's in person, or even when they're remote. It's usually an all-night thing. But for us, our hackathon focuses more on virtual. So it's a week-long hackathon and you work on your own. We ask people to dedicate 2 hours a day to working, and most teams meet via Slack or Discord. We do have a Slack channel for people to meet and who have questions, but for the most part, you're working on your own around your schedule. And once you pick a challenge and you're part of a team, then you start working with your team. And one of the things we just say is to be respectful to the fact that if you've signed on to a team, don't just leave them hanging, because then that really affects their ability to complete their part of the challenge. And most teams just come up with an MVP, which is just, a basic app or whatever it is. For the one we had in July for Justice for Black Lives, they came up with an app called Protest Away, and it was a way for anyone who wasn't comfortable protesting in person to protest online and to make a difference locally and nationally by partnering with a nonprofit organization. So a lot of great solutions come out of them. So we're excited about that. And I'll also add, because you did ask, for COVID, we had one of the things that was created was an app that helped French-speaking parts of Africa, people there, to get the correct information about COVID, because in the beginning there was so much misinformation. So we worked with a nonprofit that was doing work there and that had done work with Ebola to now have the right information and to disseminate the correct information to people in those rural parts.
Thank you so much. And for giving some background on hackathons in general. So one of I think you kind of touched on this, but maybe we can go a little bit deeper. So some of the reasons that people say there isn't full representation of women in tech is that the culture is kind of inherently toxic for women. But we see you and some others argue that it maybe goes deeper than that. And you recently posted something, do women stay away from tech because it doesn't enable them to solve real world problems, which is some of what you're talking about that you do in your hackathons. Or as some people refer to it, tech waste. So that technology only solves problems that are relevant for rich, coastal, predominantly white men. Can you speak to some of the reasons that there's not as many women in tech from either the kind of the first point or some of what you've written about? And kind of talk to maybe some of the systemic things that you think that cause a problem from women entering tech?
And I'll ask when I push back and say, well, where are you getting, where are you sourcing women from? So if you tell me your LinkedIn, that tells me that you're not connected to, anyone who knows a woman in tech. And it's amazing how many women have the experience, but it's also because some of these employers put out these job it's interesting when you see these postings and a woman, there's research that said a man will look at a job posting, and even if he doesn't have most of those skills, he'll still apply. A woman will feel like she needs to have every one of those in order to apply. So who's writing those job postings? And is it something that is appealing to a woman? And if I'm a woman in tech and I see that and I think, ooh, I don't have those credentials. We have to get away from this thinking of the credentials or what makes someone a good coder, a front end, full stack developer. That's not what it is. It's what this person knows, how they used the knowledge, and how much time they put into practicing and working on this. So it's, a lot of it has to do with they're looking at credentials, the way they write the job posting, and also not creating an inclusive environment for belonging. So if you have this bro culture, yes, it's going to be harder because the woman's going to come in there and is going to say, okay, I'm here, I'm not being valued, I'm not being respected, I'm not being seen. It's too much for me. And then you're going to have this attrition problem. And so if you're constantly, having problems with retention, which I think it's $16 billion a year tech companies lose in attrition because people are leaving. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of culture am I setting in this, in our work environment? Is it conducive to belonging? Because if it's not, then you have to re-examine and say, what do we need to do? And some of the things in addition to the hackathons, we offer is cultural competency as well as emotional intelligence, DEI, because the point is not to point fingers and say to any man or any team, oh, what you're doing is wrong, but to say, okay, how can you now, let's look at your team. What are you doing that makes someone else feel like they don't belong? And how can we now reframe that? So it's really about reframing and what can we do to make this better? So there's a lot of steps to it, but honestly, people are not taking the steps. And I have to also say, it's hard for recruiters because they're on a time crunch. So they're going to go for whatever's easiest and fastest. So they're not going to do most of that work. And for employees to implement these kind of trainings, they don't want to do it. But, there's people that do it, so they can outsource it.
Another thing that I find very interesting about the work that you've done, you've also written very extensively about men and masculinity. You have 2 sons, so this is something that you've always really thought about. Where is it not just one side or the other, but really how can we be allies in solving this problem? Because it does impact, like you said, the actual bottom lines of organizations and the level of progress that you're going to make in your company if this is continuing to be a barrier.
Should women mentor boys? Yes, because I think it's important for boys to see a woman as a leader, and vice versa, but girls get to see a lot of men as leaders. So it's very different. But the more that we start to have these conversations and not start to pit one against the other, but really say, well, how can we work together so that we can achieve some of these? And sometimes it's difficult because you have to understand the place somebody's coming from. So if men and boys have a better understanding of this is what happens, this is why this is the way it is, and this is what has been done traditionally, this is how people have behaved, this is what unfortunately society says is okay. So then it leads to this imbalance of the sexes. And what we really need to do is say, well, what can we do to be supportive? What can I, as a woman or a mother, do to support my sons? Well, for one, I can be honest and show what it's like for me as a working woman. I can be honest about the challenges that I face, but I can also be honest about, and asking them, what can you do? Or what do you see yourself doing as a man? And really start to get those conversations in a place where it's not really saying who has it worse or who has, it's not a comparison. It's really about how do you work together to make this better for And I always say, look at it from the perspective of the next generation. What do you want your son to know? What do you want your daughters to know? And if you're not giving them the truth, and if you're not preparing them, then what kind of leader are they going to be, and what are they going to think about things?
I think that segues really nicely into our next question. So in communities, so in your community or in these different communities, and say in a community like Tucson, besides, the language we use, how we talk to our children, what are some other ways that you found have been effective to prepare younger generations to enter the tech force and maybe be more interested in tech as a potential career path?
Many different online programs that kids can be involved in to learn and be introduced to it. I think we have to stop thinking that these are the only areas where a girl or a boy can be successful. I was just talking about, like, for example, online gaming. There's even college scholarships for that. So if a child wants to learn how to create games, find where people teaching gaming, where can a child start to learn how to code and get really the exposure to it. I think we need to expand more what we like I said, expose our kids to, but as also who's in our network that we can have speak to younger people about what's happening. So if somebody is in high school or college, who can they have an informal interview with, just find out, wait, so your career, what did you do? How did you get there? What should I do? We have to start making sure that our network is open to younger people, but that we also give them the tools and we do the work, that we search for, okay, what's available? What can I enroll my child in that's free? Because there are programs out there. And if anybody wants, I can always share some of the great programs that my 9-year-old does too. So, because it is important that they know we're moving. I mean, seriously, we don't want to be left behind, and you don't want your kids being left behind. And so we have to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve, and that our kids are too, and so that they have the tools so that they can stay competitive.
Yeah, that's great. Exposing them to the behind the scenes jobs, basically, right? It's not the doctor, the lawyer, the fireman, the policeman. It's the people that make our world work, but that a kid wouldn't see at face value, right? And getting those people in front of them earlier. Exactly. I think that's all great. Stacy had a great question.
Thank you for your presentation, by the way. I'm really excited about this, although I'm not a tech person, so sorry, but I'm an entrepreneur and I've sold a couple of companies and I have a lot of time, and I'm kind of getting into this whole, not just equality for women, you touched on this, like equality for, all genders, everyone. I think that's important. So examples, I'd love to hear like some of the things that your 9-year-old is doing, but also how, our community can get involved. Things that we all can do.
If you want to start to do something, it's look at maybe there's a high school that has a coding program, and maybe you can be a mentor to some of those kids. And you don't have to be a tech person. You can speak to your experience as an entrepreneur. And I mean, if we think about it, almost every company or business has a tech element, whether it's maintaining your website, whatever, digital marketing, social media, there's always going to be a component of tech to it. Offer to do like career, again, since we're all virtual, now you can expand outside of Tucson. You can either have like Zoom calls or Zoom meetings, maybe ask a high school, what are some of the things that are missing? What do your kids need? And start to have career workshops for them. Start to offer them career advice. Help maybe somebody who's going into college, help those teens understand that there's other avenues to success, or even create something on your own. You said you have the time and you have the experience. Maybe there's something that you've been thinking about, but you're saying, okay, I don't have the tech skills. Partner with somebody who does. Maybe that person who has the tech skill can be the missing piece that you need in order to start something. And you can start small. If you help one woman move up in her career, now she's going to help another. So you start that chain reaction. So look at it from that way.
Okay, so many of folks on this call actually run organizations or have teams below them. How should they be planning to respond to women that are thinking about leaving? How can they support them as a leader in a company right now, or someone who might be managing other people?
What this pandemic is also showing is that we're all human, right? Like, people have lives, things happen, and unfortunately, we are all doing our best with what we have. So it's really important to tune in and ask them, what do you need? What's happening with you? How can I support you at this time? And if they can't think of it, start to think of what are some ways you can. Maybe getting, people that are working remotely to meet outside of work just for, support. Maybe it's having somebody come in who's a mental health expert to just give a talk about what's happening right now and what people can do to practice self-care. Maybe it's just, it's being creative too. It's thinking, I saw a company, and what they had is they had somebody come in for mindfulness and just do breathing exercises. It could be something as simple as that, but people need to know that you care about them and that you see them, that they're not just a cog, and like you're not just working for you, but that you see that I have a life, I have other things going on in my life, and that you value me, not just as an employee, but as a person. So let them know that you see them.
And that came out a lot in the study too, of folks just saying how many of their managers just checked in with them, like, how are you doing? And so it's interesting that even something so small as that actually really made an aggregate impact on people's overall sense of, okay, we can get through this. Can you tell us a little bit about your favorite startup success or entrepreneurial success story that really has been inspiring to you, or that you're excited about?
My favorite story is like from somebody who lived long time ago. Her name is Ann Lowe. I don't know how many people know Ann Lowe. She was a designer, and she actually is a Black woman who designed Jackie Onassis wedding dress. And she designed a lot of dresses for like the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, all these people, but they never let people know that it was a Black woman who designed these dresses. And for one, they didn't want people to know that their dress was designed by this Black woman. But she designed these elegant and beautiful gowns, but she's kind of like a hidden figure. She's somebody that people really didn't talk about. And so she did all this and never really became wealthy because they paid her less. And so I think of that because I think about how a lot of us are not seen. We put in the work, we do a lot of the stuff, but people don't really see us, or we have to work so extra hard to be seen and heard, particularly underrepresented founders, right? Because in our startup, people underestimate us, or people think, oh, well, that's great that you're doing that, but you have, this other person's doing, everybody's looking for that unicorn. Everyone's looking for the next great thing. And then you forget that there's people doing amazing work, but the bias gets in the way. So I think of that, is particularly with Ann Lowe, because the racism got in the way for her. So she never did get rich or wealthy, and she never got the recognition that she really deserved when she was alive. And so I think we're living in a time where women, people of color, need to get that recognition and need to really be valued and seen and heard. And it shouldn't take, I'll say, and I'm going on, but I'll say this much. Prior to this, I had a social impact startup with another Black woman, and we worked with veterans and military spouses. And for every pitch, it took both of us. It took two Black women to equal one person. And it was so discouraging, because we felt like when we were on our own, no one saw us. So it had to be two of us in order for us to be seen as valuable. And I keep that in mind, even now still, like I always remind myself that, yes, I have to be seen, I have to be heard, and I can do it in a way that's still graceful, and I can still do it in a way that doesn't have to be loud, but I want to be seen. And so I think of AMLO every time I feel like I'm not seen. I want to, make sure that people and other people are seen. So make sure whatever you're doing, that you're seen in it and not be that grand person behind.
Very powerful message. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much, Marie, for spending your time with us today. This was such an impactful conversation for our team, for those, I'm sure, for others in the room.